Hello, everybody, and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today for the Employment Rights Act 2025 How Employers Should Prepare in 2026 event. I'm Grace Stokes, Head of Client Success here at Peppy, and I will be your host for the next 45 minutes. This session today is designed for HR, people, and benefits leaders who are trying to make sense of a lot of change right now. And more importantly, trying to work out what actually matters. Because the key message we want to land today is this: the Employment Rights Act 2025 is now law. And while that can feel daunting, it also gives employers a clear direction of travel. The organisations that will feel most confident in 2026 aren't the ones with the longest policies. They're the ones whose health support works well in practice. So today is all about helping you feel clearer and more confident on the ERA and not overloaded with legal detail. So we will focus on what the Act signals for employers in 2026, where organisations are most likely to be tested in practice, and how health support, particularly menopause support, can either reduce or escalate risk depending on how it's implemented. So, joining me today is Claire Neal. Claire has worked with organisations across the UK and intentionally, as an HR director, now operates as an HR and people consultant. She specialises in supporting organisations through change and transformation with a strong focus on employment risk, well-being, and doing the right thing for people and the business. Claire works closely with HR leaders dealing with real-world situations, not just policy drafting. So I'm really looking forward to her perspective today. Hello, Claire.
Thank you. Thank you, Grace, for the introduction. And hello, everyone on the call, and welcome. I'm Claire Neal. Delighted to be asked to the discussion table today by Peppy. As Grace said, my experience is in supporting businesses to manage employment risk, and given the content and context of the Employment Rights Act, putting in place modern policies and wellbeing strategies will really deliver some benefits and help reduce exposure. So I'm hoping we can give you some insights on that today.
Thanks, Claire. I know we've got lots of insights to share. So just a bit of housekeeping, won't take long before we get into the session. The session is being recorded and we will share it with you after. Please submit questions at any point during the conversation using the Q&A function. We really do want to hear from you and make sure that you're getting the most out of this session. And we'll have some time at the end and we'll aim to get through as many as possible within the time slotted. So now that's out the way, before we dive into the conversation, I want to get a sense of where everyone on this call is with the ERA. So a quick poll for you to answer. Which best describes where your organisation is right now with the Employment Rights Act 2025? It's quite a mouthful, Employment Rights Act 2025. So I am going to say ERA a lot. Are you still trying to understand what applies to you? Do you know what changes are coming but haven't prioritised action yet? Have you started reviewing your policies but aren't confident that you've covered everything? Or do you feel confident of your approach and the support that's already in place? So I'll give you a couple of seconds to answer that. And this really just helps us understand who's on the call today and how we can best support you with this conversation. Okay, we have the results. So we've got quite a mix. So we've got a few people trying to understand what the changes are. Lots of people that know the changes are, but they haven't looked at action yet. A lot of you have started reviewing your policies, so about half of you. So that's really good, but there is a lot. So of course you're probably not confident of what you've covered because there's a lot to review and then a few feeling confident. So hopefully we'll answer a few of those questions today. Claire, is this kind of what you're seeing with the clients that you're working with, a bit of a mixed bag?
Yeah, I mean, I think that planning is going to be key on this topic, really. And I think also in terms of priorities might vary across different business sectors. But I do think certainly on probably C, around there is an opportunity to review policies here, possibly rebrand, encompass some of the new things that are coming out in the ERA. So yes, I'm hopeful we can sort of cover some of those topics.
I know that's exactly what I've been speaking to some of my clients about. They say, well, we've got a policy in place, but it probably hasn't been reviewed for a while. So that's the opportunity now, is to make sure that, it's up to date and that's turning into action. So let's start at the top. We're hearing a lot about the Employment Rights Act 2025, and it's now passed into law, which sounds definitive. But for many people, many businesses, it still feels quite abstract. So, really, what is the ERA trying to change in how organisations operate?
Yeah. So, I mean, it's part of the government's initiative to make work pay, but putting that sort of political context aside, if you like, the purpose is really to keep people in work and improve job security. It's also about modernising working conditions, which means there are some significant changes and updates for employers. I mean, the key takeaways here really are the focus on family-friendly policies and also on well-being and equality.
And that's obviously a view for employees. But what about organisations? So, why should organisations really care?
Uh, I think organisations have a real opportunity here because if they can implement these changes right and well, it will be valued by employees because there are evolving needs and expectations that we see from the people in our organisations. It will deliver improved conditions and support for employees. And that is across a range of issues that actually matter to them. And from the organisation's perspective on that side, it should therefore deliver a positive impact, such as, reducing absenteeism, higher levels of engagement and productivity, and better retention if we get all of these things right. So overall, we're balancing that increased risk profile, which we see in some of the areas of the ERA, with those positive outcomes.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. And when we think specifically about 2026, which we are now very much in, what should HR leaders be most focused on now versus obviously what's coming down the line in 2027?
So, I mean, in responding to that question, I am just going to walk through a couple of slides here for everyone. Just to say, this is not an entirely exhaustive list, and as you know, some of the details are still in consultation, but I focused on the key actions, deliverables that I think, we should be thinking about and dealing with right now. So let's start with this year, as you say, Grace, 2026. April being the key date for a number of those changes, and that's not that far away. Firstly, we've got an increase in the protective award for failure to consult, so some changes around collective redundancy. So any of those of you who are embarking on change programs, need to ensure that your business is aware of those, potentially increased commercial costs or the risks of getting things wrong. We also know that, again, coming down the line on collective redundancy, there will be some changes around the threshold for establishments and looking at aggregate in terms of establishments instead of just a single establishment if redundancies are happening across your business. I think one of the key focuses I mentioned earlier is really the whole area around family-friendly policies, and this has been a big headline in terms of day one rights for SSP, paternity leave, and unpaid parental leave. And I think it's fair to say Others are going to be coming down the line. We know that bereavement leave will be introduced in the next year. But it's likely there may be others as consultation happens, as government legislation gets updated. And I think in terms of the next area, really the other key theme is well-being and equality. So whistleblowing will now include disclosures around sexual harassment, so protection on detriment and dismissal. But again, a new initiative around the voluntary action plans for both gender pay and menopause. We know that gender pay reporting has been required for larger organisations for some years now, but the introduction of menopause is new. And linking those together is, all around gender inequality. So we will talk specifically about menopause plans a bit later, but April is not that far away. It is about starting now, developing plans, and actually communicating about that within the business.
Yeah.
In terms of again, one of the other areas around a longer claiming period for putting in industrial employment tribunal claims. This is really important in terms of documentation and record keeping now. Something that we need to give guidance to managers on. We know also there's a massive backlog around the whole process of hearing tribunals, so cases are listed a lot later, so hugely important to properly document any employee issues arising. The additional protections around sexual harassment, around taking all reasonable steps as an employer, including third parties. This is all about, again, policy reviews, ensuring all your policies knit together, that there's a lens across everything, be it, as we said, whistleblowing, be it, as we say, equality. And the final point on this slide is, the fact that trade union rights have increased under the Act in general. There's a number of legs to that, which I'm not specifically covering here. But there is a general point, which is that all employees should understand that they have, be notified of the right to join a trade union. And we need to ensure that contracts are updated, induction is updated, and that, again, manager guidance is given appropriately on that. I'll move on to the next slide. Thank you. Okay, so again, it's January 2027 is not feeling that far away, really, when we sit here today. But we believe it is most likely that January is when the specific and quite headline changes, as you all have heard, around the changes to the service period for claiming unfair dismissal will change, and the compensation cap will be removed. From an HR people perspective and a business perspective, that can heighten the risk profile of claims in your business, specifically around the reduction in time period. Will mean that we need to update processes around recruitment, probation, performance management, and back to that whole point about documentation and understanding that, managers really clearly document things in the business. In terms of April 2027, as we say, we talked about the voluntary action plans a little bit. These now become law. These now become compulsory. And actually, the key thing for this is understanding what you're going to track, creating that plan, be able to measure that, be able to communicate it, and use that as actually a positive initiative for your business. And we'll talk again further in this conversation about some of the ways that other organisations are doing and have started that process. Flexible working requests, we have a flexible working requirement within all of our businesses, but actually the legislation is starting to make that a much more de facto position. And this is all about documenting, again, following a process around if we refuse any flexible working requests. So be mindful of that across all of your policies. So consistency is just going to be hugely important in terms of that education for managers. We've also, again, back to the whole kind of family-friendly approach that the legislation is delivering. I know that there are some additional protections coming in for our pregnant employees and maternity returners, as well as the introduction of bereavement leave. And again, this is just extending some rights, but actually strengthening them. And I think the big thing here is probably the manager guidance and education around all of that. And the last point for me, just very briefly, and it will be relevant for those in sectors where 0 hours contracts are currently in place, is that will move to the right to guaranteed hours and will require obviously a commercial lens across your business, working with payroll to understand what that looks like and the impact around contracts and commercial. Thank you.
Great, thank you. I think that's really good to see that breakdown because, like we said at the beginning, it can feel overwhelming, and there is a lot to think about. But when it's broken down like that, it does feel achievable and a really good way for everyone to have those dates in their diary. So, if we now break that down into a practical level, I'm sure many people on this call are thinking about those real life situations, not just the policy wording. So, are there kind of 2 or 3 practical things that HR teams can do this year that are going to make the biggest difference for next year and when those things come into action?
Yeah, I mean, I think the key message to take away from that information has to be that early action matters. This is a fairly well publicised set of changes that your employees will be aware of as well. So leaving things to the last minute, I think, it could risk potential claims, reputational damage as an employer. We need to get on board here. So my first bit of advice would be, create an ERA working group, which is what is working in other organisations. And it should be cross-functional because it needs to include your payroll folks, finance, IT, comms and marketing, as well as the people team, because it's a business issue and a business responsibility. It doesn't just sit with the people team to figure this out. And it means then you can focus on all the kind of across the board planning, including, financial planning, as well as all the communication and guidance education aspects that need to go on. So secondly, develop your plan, get a plan together with timescales, and that needs to include an audit of the current contracts, current policies and processes. And they need as I say, I think the point here is be forward looking with those policies, take the opportunity to rebrand, think what might be coming down the line in the future. And finally, I think my other piece of advice would be to either create or use an existing employee group that you may have. This will be really valuable for input and review to the plan, and in particular will help you understand if any new processes or things that you're considering rolling out will work in practice or will be valued in practice, and what additional gaps and support might be required that you haven't thought of because you're maybe not in that group of individuals who it might impact. So, and that can be beneficial in many ways, and give you the mood music of what's happening.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we see this behavior a lot with the clients that we work with at Peppy. They find the biggest success, whether it's implementing Peppy or writing a new policy, when they create those cross-functional working groups or use the employee resource groups that are in place, because that means that every part of the business is represented, but also it means that awareness can spread through the organization more effectively because you've got that those people to cascade the message, which is obviously really key because we want these things to actually work well in practice as well. So we talked about the Act more broadly, and again, thank you for that timeline. It's super helpful. But one conversation that obviously you mentioned, or one area that always comes up with HR leaders is menopause. And what's interesting is that it isn't usually because organizations don't care. It's often because menopause sits at the intersection of health, performance, and retention at work. And I think if you don't know, 1 in 4 women actually consider leaving the workplace when going through menopause, and 1 in 10 actually leave. And the demographic of the women aged 45 to 55 who go through menopause is the fastest growing segment of the workforce. So employers must act to support these women. It isn't something that kind of should be forgotten. It should be at the forefront. So from your perspective, Claire, and working with different organisations, why is it more important now than ever that employers prioritise that menopause support, and obviously why we're seeing it in the ERA?
I mean, you're right, Grace. It's an increasing area of focus, I think, in both in the employment market and employee life cycle. And of course, women are likely to be more skilled and knowledgeable at this stage in their careers, and therefore employers don't want to lose them, can't afford to lose them from their teams. So it's really important to have plans and support in place for women going through menopause and documented processes for managers to follow. I think the lack of these is sometimes where we see things fall down, and potential claims or issues arising. In terms of the practical things you can be doing, I think educating and skilling managers is key so that they are confident in handling sensitive conversations and normalizing them, and also, able to signpost people to where support is available. I think it's not good enough to just point to a policy. Making sure that there is some expert support that individuals can access seems to be really helpful, because then people can go off and do that for themselves.
And I think that's the key thing, making sure that managers are equipped with the tools to signpost, because we're not asking everyone to be experts, but it's knowing where people can go and giving them that support if that is through an external resource. And this is something we've really been focusing on at Peppy, and supporting a lot of our clients with, is that workplace training. So enhancing workplace support, upskilling managers, and really creating an environment where employees are comfortable to discuss their healthcare challenges, and know that they can get that help from leadership should they need to, which obviously leads to a lot more benefits for them and the business. Do you have any other client examples of how you've seen companies really create a safe space for women?
Yeah, I mean, one other organization has set up an internal network. Essentially, it's self-managed, but led by champions who, initially came on board through seeking volunteers, and they've created a safe space for women to come together and share and ask questions and get colleague support. And this group is now working with the people team and an external provider actually to promote education on menopause, and they're issuing out things like little talking head videos, and they also give input and feedback now on proposed changes to policies and the training that will be provided. I mean, others are building out, obviously, on their existing gender equality plans to specifically include menopause, and again, looking at practical adjustments, an online access where women can get that expert information and speak to people.
Yeah, of course. I think that's really helpful context and kind of leads me on to my next question of, you know, you mentioned there people are building out their gender equality plans. So if an organization is considering a menopause action plan now, and it isn't until 2027 that a lot of organizations need them, but we definitely encourage that acting early and doing the voluntary one if you can. So what are those 2 to 3 crucial steps that employers really should be taking?
I think right now, there is some benchmarking. Look outside of your own organization, look at what other people are doing, but set realistic targets for your own business. Not everybody, can be gold standard, or it needs to fit your own business. I think the manager guidance, as we've said, is just going to be key here, so that we don't sort of lose impetus or lose information. So they're able to give support, and something around that access to some credible and real support outside of the organization, because sometimes that is where people want to go. They want to be signed, they want to take those conversations away themselves.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, like we said, we can't all be experts at everything. And something I find really important, or what I've seen really work, is taking all those points and then really putting that action into practice. I think once you've got that plan and you've got an idea, we don't just want to plan, we want to see it in practice. And that's where those champions and those networks and the resource groups really help you take it that one step further. And that's where employees really start to see the benefit as well. So we've spoken about why the ERA exists and how it's there to protect employees and people. But again, I just want to kind of go back to businesses. So what are the business outcomes of doing this really well?
So I think the opportunity here is to really reshape some of your key people policies, and by doing that, applying the changes that are required by the Act will actually deliver some tangible benefits for your business. I mean, we all want to be attractive as an employer, and doing this right can bring, I believe, that competitive advantage. If you introduce the policies and support that is going to benefit your employees and support their work-life balance, and this, the emerging expectations that people have of their workplace, you can then start to measure the outcome through increased retention, potentially lower absenteeism, and higher engagement and productivity. All of those metrics are measurable, and can be tracked on a regular basis. and where businesses are potentially thinking about funding additional support as part of their planning activity, that is where the cost benefit analysis comes in, and is very helpful in presenting all of those sort of commercial benefits. I think that the other thing to say is that if you look at the ERA and some of the headlines, and speak to the lawyers, if you like, they will, the risk profile is enhanced. There is potential for earlier claims, more claims. But actually, the point is, if we get some of these foundations in place in the business and things are being managed, appropriately, properly, in line with your policies and your overall strategy and aspirations, then it should ensure that risk is minimized, as far as possible. And that's the point of actually getting in early and doing this planning.
Yeah. And getting in early and doing that planning also allows you that time just to get it right and look at what else can be done. And like you say, the more time you have, that risk eventually will be minimized. So yeah, the time is now. I've asked you a lot of questions, Claire, so I just want to remind the audience that there will be a Q&A with Claire in a few minutes, so please do keep those questions coming in. So I just kind of really want to reiterate where this comes to in life and day-to-day working reality. And from an ERA readiness point of view, there are three areas where we really consistently see pressure and where PEPI directly supports employers. So firstly, sickness and absence. This is often where things start small and quietly escalate. We know that short-term health issues can become more complex because someone doesn't get support, they don't have access to it, or a manager isn't sure how to respond really early on. And what we see in organisations that use PEPI is that employees have somewhere confidential and credible to go early on. So that early intervention can really prevent issues drifting into long-term absence or those formal processes that Claire obviously mentioned. And from an ERA perspective, that really matters because it demonstrates that support is available, accessible, and clearly signposted within your organisation. The second is obviously menopause action plans. So menopause is an example of where that intention and impact don't always line up, but the policies and action plans are really important. But what we know really makes the difference is whether people can access that timely specialist support and when we can see those policies and action plans put into action. Many employers who already use PEPI, they have it there to sit behind those menopause action plans because providing PEPI is evidence that employers are practicing exactly what they preach, and that practical layer of support really does reduce the escalation into absence, grievances, or people leaving the business altogether. So really protecting your organisation from risk. And finally, the third is reasonable adjustments and neurodiversity. So this is an area where organisations are increasingly tested. Managers generally really want to do the right thing, but they're not equipped and they're often unsure how to interpret needs of individuals, team members, and implement those adjustments on their own. So access to the expert guidance really does help clarify the needs earlier. It supports more timely adjustments and it reduces inconsistency across teams and across your business. That consistency and that evidence is really important under the ERA, where fairness and reasonable treatment are under so much more scrutiny. So if you do want to learn more about how Peppy supports neurodiversity specifically, we do have a webinar next week. It's on your screen now. We would absolutely love for you to join us there. And again, that will be looking at one of our clients, how they built an award-winning neurodiversity support at BNP Paribas. So please do join us if that's something that is on your radar, but again, should definitely be something you're considering under the ERA. So, the kind of key takeaway that I want to leave you with before we get into questions is when health or life events affect work, it's really about making sure there's somewhere appropriate to turn and that support shows up early, clearly, and consistently rather than after things have already escalated. And that's where solutions like Peppy tend to fit for many, many organizations. So thank you, Claire, for already sharing so much knowledge with us today. That was incredibly helpful. And every time I do these sessions, I learn more. So thank you. But now it's over to our audience so they can ask the questions that they've been waiting for. So thank you to everyone that's sending them in. We've got a few more minutes. So if anyone has anything pressing to ask, please use the Q&A. So Claire, to kick us off, are there any example organisations who are already publishing their menopause action plans that you can either signpost to if we want to be an early adopter, or do you know where something might be published?
I haven't got any specific organisation to talk to. I think people are busy at the moment,
Yeah,
shipping and
they certainly are.
producing. They certainly are. So yeah, I mean, I think the point is it's the planning right now of those plans. But I would look to for people who, if we look at what some of the organisations have been doing around the gender pay reporting, some organisations on that website have posted their gender pay action plans as part of that. So that's a good place to have a look at some of the larger organisations.
Amazing, thank you. And Peppy also has a menopause action plan resource. So we'll share some more details on how you can access that as well. But that's really an actionable guide on how you can focus on action plans, why they matter, what you need to put in place. And again, these are taken from some of the organizations or insights from some of the organizations that we work with as well. Another question for you, Claire. Are you expecting the gender plan to expand to include reporting fertility support or for conditions such as endometriosis?
We obviously are waiting on further consultation. There is ongoing consultation and information to come out on some of the details of what needs to be put into those plans, both gender pay action plan and menopause action plan. So it's unclear at the moment, but as I said, I think we should be forward looking. I think organisations can take those initiatives on themselves, and that then becomes part of their approach to, managing that overall kind of well-being and equality.
Yeah, I mean, I had a conversation with a client this week about menstrual leave and the rise of conversation around that. So, like you say, I think it's be forward thinking, and these things are definitely a topic of conversation. So it is definitely worth thinking about now. There's a question for me, so thank you, whoever asked this. But does Peppy offer manager training as part of their service? Yes, we do. So we do have a workplace training service, which covers everything that we support at Peppy. So from fertility to mental health, to menopause, to becoming a parent, return to work. So please do get in touch if you have more questions about that. We would love to talk to you about it. Back to you, Claire. With the change coming with regards to being able to claim unfair dismissal after 6 months, would you recommend employers look at their probation period timescales?
I mean, yes, I think the key process is to look at, our recruitment, probation, and performance management, which kind of all are very much linked in that kind of early 6 months. So yes, be looking at probation. This is all going to be about how, again, conversations are managed in the context of performance, how people are doing in their probation, and early decisions that managers might need to take. And again, as we've said, document, have those conversations. Managers need to be guided very, very clearly through that process.
And I actually think this leads us on really nicely to the next question, which is how can HR or people teams support managers without overwhelming them? Because, like you say, there's a lot for managers to think about here and a lot of changes to the way that they're going to be working, and it feels like a lot of responsibility for them to take on as well. So how can you really balance that with not making them feel like there's the overwhelm?
Yeah, I mean, it is all about communication. I also think it's doing things in bite-sized chunks. So, getting people, some knowledge, a fully understanding of the policies, a bit like we're saying, getting it so that managers are able to ask questions and have that coaching internally as well as the information so that they don't feel overwhelmed. They know where they can go to. Their people team are providing them with information, coaching them, and giving them back up. And that's really how it will work best.
Yeah, I think that's something that I've definitely seen. It's not, you must know everything now. It's knowing that there's a resource in place that when that issue might arise, they know where to go and they know what to follow. I think, like I said before, we don't all need to be experts right away, but we need that support in place to really help us. I don't think we've got any more questions right away, and we're getting close to time. So thank you so much, Claire. I've like I said, I've learned so much, and I know it's going to be so helpful for me having conversations with clients and helping them really get ready for the ERA. And thank you so much to everyone who joined us today. We really value your time and your questions coming in. So before we kind of finish off, I just want to say one final thing. As a massive thank you for joining us today. This session includes exclusive access to PEPI's Employment Rights Act 2025 Guide for HR. I've seen it, I've read it, Claire has contributed to it, and it's so useful. So this guide brings together a clear summary of what matters most in 2026, where risk tends to show up in practice, and then those practical considerations for health support, including menopause. So to receive your copy, just scan the QR code on screen now, but we will also include it in the follow-up email alongside the recording of this session. So look out for that as well. And thank you again for your time today. And we really hope to see you at a future session soon. Thank you. Goodbye.